Welcome to CMOs Without Borders.
I'm Joel Crampton. I help financial advisors, RIAs, and wealth managers replace scattered marketing with strategic systems that boost AUM and production volume.
I'm Mandy MacPhee. I am a fractional chief marketing officer and work with founders who are doing too much and need someone to turn their scattered marketing into a system that actually drives results. Hey, today on CMOs Without Borders, Joel and I will be chatting with Randy Frisch about legacy planning and how AI is reinventing the estate planning space. How do we move estate planning from legal obligation to emotional expression? What does it look like when your letter of wishes becomes a living, interactive, AI augmented document? Randy Frisch is the founder of Trusty, the AI-driven estate planning platform tackling the $84 trillion wealth transfer. Ooh, that's a big number. Before Trusty, he co-founded Uberflip, one of Canada's top SaaS success stories, acquired after scaling globally. Randy's mission now is to bring clarity, confidence, and connection to how families manage their legacies. His passions are watching kids play hockey or dance and tries to keep himself young with CrossFit and surfing. Welcome, Randy.
Thanks so much for having me, to both of you, Mandy and Joel. Really excited for this.
Yes, let's talk about life milestones and let's talk about Trustee. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Thanks, and thanks for the opportunity again to talk about it. It's a really exciting space. As you said, Mandy, I spent over 10 years in the marketing space and many times being a CMO, which maybe is part of what, allows me to be on this podcast and try and, keep up with the two of you. But this venture is in a space that was very new to me. I didn't have an estate background. And in fact, I personally relied on a lot of really bright advisors around me to help me think proactively about my estate. And I honestly thought that I had my whole estate, covered. I had a will. I had some complexity to my estates. I had what's also called a secondary will in Canada. There's different ways to structure that in the US, for the Joel side of things here. But the reality is, like, I really trusted the estate lawyer that they had me covered on that front. And an interesting couple of stories on a personal side that I can share led me to realize that there's a whole category outside of what I'm going to call like the legally binding documents that are really important if we want to make sure that our actual intention and our actual wishes are not just carried out, but are actually understood. And it's one thing for me to say I want certain things that I cherish, whether it's a family heirloom or a piece of jewelry, to go to one of my three kids in the future. But how many of us have actually documented that? And what I learned is a lot of those things don't actually make it into your will or your trust documents. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can get into today that's made me realize that there's a need for products to solve on this front.
You're absolutely right in saying the estate planning process is very much a set of documents and a very cold process. And, as we talk about Trustee and what you're doing, you're bringing some emotional connection to that cold process, which is amazing. And you're bringing the emotional connection beforehand compared to the emotional connection when somebody passes away is completely different if you've got the right legacy planning in place. When legacy planning doesn't happen properly before, it causes a lot of grief and strife for families after the fact.
Yeah, dead on. I think the big word that I've heard a lot of experts in this space say is that we need more clarity. And that the lack of clarity, to your point, Mandy, can actually just create conflict. And if you may not like what you learn when it's known, but
Yeah.
at least you may be frustrated with the person who passed one day, as opposed to your sibling or someone in your family who you end up fighting over things because there's the lack of clarity to begin with. So
Right.
I think understanding intent can create a much better path towards that next generation of family continuity, and as you said, just emotional rest.
Yeah. So, what drove you to, and inspired you to reimagine the estate planning process?
Well, as you'd imagine, with what we're solving for, is a couple personal stories, but I'm happy to share them. The first was kind of unique in that you alluded to in the kind of intro you did, that I sold a company that I started in the marketing space. And I always had this romantic concept in mind that on my last day of work, selling that business, I'd stop on the way home and buy my wife something nice, because even though she wasn't working in the business, she allowed me to really put so much time and effort into that. So I followed through on this idea. I bought her a nice bracelet. This is on my last day of work, finished transitioning my role in the company. And I brought home, gave her the bracelet. She loved it. Things went well on that front. And then if people listening are familiar, often when you buy anything of high value, whether it's a piece of jewelry or a piece of art, or even, like we were talking about earlier, a boat, all of these things end up coming with really important paperwork and documents that you're supposed to hold on to. So this piece of jewelry had that appraisal doc you're supposed to hold on to. And I put it, I know not everyone's probably watching, but in this drawer to the right of me in this office that I'm sitting in right now. And as I said, this was my first day not working. And I looked at the drawer, not thinking there's a business here, but I looked at the drawer saying, why do I have all this paper in this drawer that's clearly important? And the interesting thing is, we had just done our wills just a couple months earlier because of this sale of the business. And I realized, like, we didn't allude to any of these things. And these were, as I said, pieces of jewelry from different anniversaries, art that we've bought in the house, the boat that I just alluded to a couple of times now. It was a fancy receipt drawer that I forgot existed. There's no way my wife knew existed. And I started to think, like, if something happened to us, would an executor even know which drawers to go look in? And the executor, for those who aren't familiar, is the person who oversees your wishes and your will in terms of distributing those assets. So without anything beyond the will, would they know this? And that was the first moment that I realized that there was, a need here. As I said, this was my first day not working, so I wasn't chomping at the bit to go build something. So a couple of months later, another personal event happened, which was a loss in our family of a grandmother. So it was my grandmother. She was actually 104 years old. So an amazing life.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, hard to ask for much more. She still lived on her own. She had success, her and my grandfather, over many years. She had a really well thought out will and plan, like I described for myself, with those great advisors. And then there was a scattering of literally handwritten notes from over decades. I mean, she lived to 104. It made sense, where things changed. And it just created a lot of ambiguity around who was going to get what of her items outside of the traditional will. So again, we're talking about art in her home. We're talking about handbags. She had some nice handbags that some of her granddaughters and great granddaughters were definitely interested in. And I watched the process unfold, thought back to my drawer, and just said, there's an opportunity here. There's a need here. And that kind of took me down this road of starting with, how do we make it more clear what someone like my grandmother, or anyone here listening, your family, or you and your family for the generations that follow, how do you make it clear who's supposed to get what?
Isn't that key? Randy and I actually met Randy because I reached out after his successful funding round. Congratulations again, Randy. But I took a look at Trusty, and I shared a very personal story with my family as well, in that my husband's dad passed away a couple of years ago, and he's just wrapping up the estate now. But within that 2 years, the amount of questions that he had with respect to what his father's wishes were beyond what was in the will was, created a lot of strife for his family, for his siblings, because they didn't know where those legacy items needed to go. They didn't know what his wishes were outside of what was articulated in the will, which was just the land, their house, the money. Beyond that, like, there was not much there. So I was really interested in what Randy was doing because of the way you are shaping the story and storytelling and creating stories for legacy planning that families will really appreciate going forward.
I'm just thinking about the traditional approaches that families take to divvy up things outside of the will or the trust. And it goes to things like putting post-it notes or little stickers on the backs or bottoms of things around the house, and then leaving it up to the mom or the dad to figure out what's an even balance and how do you value those types of things. So I think having a digital platform is just makes so much more sense, and it can take into account all the hundreds of things that are around the house. My dad every once in a while will go through and do like a handwritten inventory of everything that he's accumulated over the past, since the last time he made the list, and do some sort of addendum. I mean, none of this is legally binding, and I'd be curious to see from a trusty platform perspective the legality of it. But that's just something that I just, again, have had firsthand experience as well. And it's very awkward because death is not something most people like to talk about. Having this type of conversation as early on as possible with your loved ones is fantastic. And if you can have a very coordinated approach to it, like this platform, like Trusty, that makes it all digital. And Randy, please go into actually what the platform looks like,
Sure.
because I think a lot of audiences, especially the financial advisors that I work with, aren't even aware of this type of platform. They are still stuck on the let's write a handwritten list. Let's says it goes to Sally or Johnny, and then we talk about grandkids. And so I would just love to learn more about the platform, and I think a lot of our listeners would too.
First of all these stories that both of you have shared, what I've realized, and we'll come back to storytelling for sure here, but everyone has a personal story on this front. And I think it's one of those situations that until you're in it, you don't realize how messy and disorganized it often is. Going back to our own situation, we were fortunate. Everyone got along almost to a fault in that no decisions got made. She'd want you to have it. No, she'd want you to have it. Everyone
There's a lot of things on my dad's list that my brother and I are like, neither one of us want this.
That happens
My mom
too.
has a whole China collection, and we just like, what are we gonna do with this, Mom? We just like we're gonna probably put it in an auction, and I know it kills the parents because they spend so much time, developing these treasured collections of things, and it is very personal, and every family I think goes through it. So I think, like I said, if we can, whatever we can do to take the emotion out of this process, the better, and especially if we can do it before people get sick or are on their deathbed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll touch on some of the features and how they align with a lot of articles that I've found that are out there around topics like you just hit on, Joel, like dementia as an example is such a factor in when you make these wishes and when you clarify. And a lot of things, unfortunately, get into question when it's simply a handwritten letter. What was their state? Was this document, say it was a Post-it note, to your point. Is there a date on that Post-it note? Most likely not. So how do you reconcile that with perhaps another letter that was written or some sort of wish that was verbally exchanged? And as much as we don't want to get into a scenario where we're time-stamping things and looking back to an audit trail of sort, we're trying, as Mandy said, to do it in a more upbeat, sentimental, emotional way that everyone can rally around. Back to the technology or more the solution that we've put together here. The whole approach starts on a mobile app. And there's a lot of reasons that we do that. I won't get into all of them other than we use a lot of the device, whether it's an iPhone or an Android device. We use the device's capabilities for a combination of image capture and some of the AI functionality that we can run off of that I'll get into. So in a very simple example, and I know some people are listening versus watching, My room is completely not staged. If you look back on old podcasts I did in the marketing space, I had the same stuff behind me. The piece of art behind me on the wall here, which we love in my family, was my wife's grandmother's. And if I tilt my camera for a minute, that chair was my grandfather's, right? These things are in our house, and they very much define us. So what's very cool is I could take out my phone with the app. I take a photo of either of those, and it's actually going to skip the whole process of me trying to describe this item, right? Especially if they're more branded items, we can go and use some of the AI out there to match this to the fact that it's a signed Mahomes jersey if you're a football fan, or something otherwise that might really be able to be detailed in a lot of detail, like we said, boats, cars, or other things that we can do really well. We have over 20 different categories where you simply take that photo and we take that first annoying phase out of trying to catalog everything that you have. The next thing that we do is we allow you to list your family, including your beneficiaries and heirs, such as your children. And on an asset by asset basis, simply follow a step-by-step flow that I'm not kidding you, whether you're 22 or 102, you can figure this thing out. We're very cognizant of who our user might be. And you can say, okay, great. This piece of art is going to my daughter. Now, I'm going to come back. I'm going to pause on the functionality. I'm going to tell you a quick story. And you hit on the importance of storytelling earlier. So when I was in the early phases, what I just described to you was pretty much all the functionality we had built. We thought it was so cool. We're taking a paper list and we're replicating that, as Joel said, in a digital format. And I was out and I was talking to this guy who I know, and I'm not a watch guy, but he was wearing this really distinguishable watch. It was quite unique. And I just casually said to him, I'm like, that's a cool piece. And he got all emotional. And he said, you know what? My dad died earlier this year. He left me this watch. I wear it to every event since. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I said, what's the backstory? Like, why this watch? What was so meaningful? And he said to me, he goes, to be honest, I don't know. He goes, the only item that he specified was to come to me was this. It was on a list like we're describing, but I don't know the story. I don't know how he got it. I don't know anything, but I wear it because it was his. And in that moment, I'm like, in one way that's beautiful, but I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if he knew the backstory? Wouldn't it be interesting if he knew where his dad bought it, why he thought of him, and why he called this out specifically? And in that moment, we decided to add functionality to the flow I just told you, where you can actually add a video wish as well. So on the piece of art that's behind me, I can clarify that, to your point, Joel, as much as maybe my kids don't want this piece of art, it's got some real meaning behind it, tied to now multiple generations who have had this in their home. And this is why we'd like it to hang in my daughter's home, as an example. There's this really unique function in what we're building that, not to diminish the importance of a will, because it's essential in terms of estate planning, but it lacks a lot of that emotion. It lacks a lot of that storytelling by design. It's designed for a court process. It's designed to ensure the settlement process goes well. And as a result, we're told by our advisors, write a note, write a sticky note, do something to make sure people know those real intentions. And that's what we're trying to elevate here.
The storytelling component is so critical to differentiate what you're doing, Randy. And it's the best, honestly, I believe it's the best part of the platform. What you're calling the letter of wishes, which allows people to leave a message behind, a video message behind, just adds that additional value to what they're leaving behind. That is, in my opinion, the most invaluable piece of what the actual thing is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, maybe shifting from the solution and more broadly, one of the elements that I learned from my last business and trying to inject now is to figure out what is that thing, right? Like what is the deliverable that your product or solution or company as a whole gives someone that they can identify with? And it's actually quite interesting. Like at first, we were so excited by some of these, I'm going to call them features and capabilities But over time, we realized that we have to connect the outcome to something that's more tangible. And I'm trying to use broad terms here just so anyone can think about that for their business or their client journey. But what we're starting to realize is that this letter of wishes, which we actually have vision to become much bigger than just a letter of wishes, which I can explain, but that is the tangible outcome. And as a result, we're trying to figure out what is the best form factor even for that. And interestingly, even though we have this amazing app that is so cool to use, like it's, when I tell you that it takes that photo and does this AI magic, it does other cool things like remove the background from the photo to make it look a little bit more of a high-end e-commerce feel, even if you took the photo yourself. But aside from all the amazing things we do on that app, what we're doing is we're summarizing all of this in a document that sits alongside the rest of your estate plans. And so conforming a little bit to, I'm going to call it traditional but accepted forms of how an estate's going to get managed is just as much as our flow is trying to push technology. But Joel, you said earlier, like sometimes these notes are on stickies, like we said, or they're handwritten. Ours is going to have a much better structure. So you open it up, it explains what that asset is. There's a page for each of your heirs so that those pages can be handed out with a list. And then on that page is a QR code so that you can scan the QR code and watch the video wish in that moment. So bundling up a lot of these digital moments into something that actually is a really valuable keepsake and planner.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the legacy letter component of this. We did talk about removing the emotion from the process, but adding that emotion back into it in a very structured way that has meaningful and constructive components to it. So you take out the roadblocks of the emotion when you're kind of going through this process after someone maybe has passed away. So you take all that emotion out, but then you want to add that back into this process because that's the power. I mean, it's the stories almost are almost more valuable than the stuff. And so having the ability to have those videos in there from grandma and grandpa or any of your loved ones as kind of a legacy, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, our goal is ultimately, as I talked about, something bigger than just the letter of wishes, is to turn this into more of an estate binder of sort that allows you to gather various wishes for various needs. I mean, we've talked so far about personal valuables, and that's a lot of what our platform focuses on today. But what we're looking at is what are all those various things that you may want to document outside of the will. And that gets into things, like you said, that may just be a free-form note for some sort of direction. There's a lot of elements in someone's will that, again, are quite matter of fact and to the point. If something were to happen to me and my wife, who's going to raise our kids? So it's very clear in the will who's going to raise our kids. And even if something happened to them, who would raise the kids if something happened to them? But what is not clear is how to raise our kids. What's our wish on how they should actually be raised? Similarly, how do we want our own funerals to look? What type of wishes do we have on that front, on everything from form of burial to who's doing a eulogy? There's all these different topics where, again, the will is very to the point and lacks detail, lacks the clarity that we talked about earlier. So we're exploring different ways to replicate the workflows that we have in the app today, to say, okay, whether you want to write a note, type out a note in the app, or whether you want to record a video wish, this becomes a much larger assembly of estate planning that can be handed on to your executor, that can be handed on to key family members. And as a result, we understand that whole picture.
You mentioned it lacks the documentation, it lacks the clarity, but it also lacks the emotion. So when you're completing the wills and you're completing all these estate documents, it really lacks that emotional connection, which I think is critical to ensuring that you're executing on your loved one's wishes. I want to go back, Randy, to something that you said earlier and tie this back to marketing because that's what we're here for. as well. You talked a little bit about when you first started, you were tying back to product features and talking about product features that rather than talking about that emotional connection, the outcome for the people that you're serving. Help our audience understand how you're getting to outcomes with storytelling versus product feature and benefit push.
Let's also add in, if you can, Randy, how financial advisors, financial planners, estate attorneys, trust, those types of folks can utilize this tool, this platform to differentiate themselves with their clients and prospects that they're working with as a value add service that they're providing.
Absolutely. So I'll come to Joel's question, but maybe just to tease it up front, and this is an important element of our product. Our product is imminently going to actually be completely free to consumers. Right now, there's a bit of a paywall and freemium model, but we're going to remove that. And the goal is to make this free to users. As you'd expect with a model like that, we got to make money somewhere. And that's where the advisor relationship comes in. What we've learned from a lot of people is that to assemble their estate picture, they do rely on advisors, especially when you get into, I'm going to say, mass affluent and even higher into high net worth family dynamic. They're not all doing this online as much as we think they are. A lot of these online tools that do wills for $100, $200 are great because we do need wills and they're solving a big problem there, but they're for much more simple estate, So to come back to this question, though, on how we think about features, oddly, it actually comes back to storytelling in a sense. And what I mean by that is we've understood what the stories are by talking to a combination of our users and talking to these advisors that I've just spoken to. So I'll give you an example of a feature and then how we adapt that into a little bit more of a story and emotional moment. So one of the features that we added very on was just specific location of where your will is kept. In most places, and this is changing and evolving, but in most places, just because we actually store your will, which I haven't maybe hit on, but we also store your estate plans in our app, such as your will and your power of attorney and other life insurance documents and whatnot. But just because we have that, you still need a physical copy. So when we created that functionality, we said, okay, well, we should also list where that document is kept. And when we started showing this concept to financial advisors and to families, they got so excited about this one little field. They just said, like, you know what, we could never find, or we'd be going on vacation, we'd be all in a sweat as to like who's getting the kids if something happens to us, and we can't even find the will to review it. They're like, if I could just open up and remember where I left this thing. And the same thing we heard from financial advisors. One of the most common emails they get is, I can't find my will. Can you tell me the following information? So as we got out and we kept hearing about these stories, and everyone had this same story of like locating the will, we started to learn other interesting insights. Where are wills most often kept? One of the most common places I didn't realize that people keep their will is actually their freezer, which I didn't know
before. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the advisors said to us, you should really add into your default list of locations freezer. And I was like, I don't know if we should be encouraging that. That seems odd. But
there's actually a lot of zero power of attorneys, DNR, do not resuscitate, those types of orders. Like people will put a magnet on the refrigerator for first responders to go. Like if they come into the house, they know to go to look for this magnet on a refrigerator, and then either within the magnet itself or in the freezer will be some of that documents. I don't know why they do the freezer versus the refrigerator side of it, but yeah, I've definitely heard that. So I think that is a good potential feature upgrade.
Interesting. I like the origin. See, these stories though, they are they feed our understanding of what we're solving, and as a result, we don't talk about the field. We talk about the reality of, imagine not being able to find your will in a moment where it really matters. And Joel hit on some of the other documents that might be in there, like a health directive in terms of really important decisions. This package of documents that we're creating is not just for end of life. It's, to guide at different milestones in your life. So making sure that we explain, the situations that you may find yourself in versus the feature that we've built is how we're trying to be more relevant. And we're doing this, I think for all marketers, this is a challenge. How do you make your offer relevant in this moment when people have so many different priorities and you just want them to care about what you do? And if you take a step back and you look at what we're doing, everyone listening to this podcast is probably sitting there saying right now, oh my gosh, I haven't dealt with any of this. I should really deal with this.
Yeah.
But even still, will you? And how do we get them to do it? It's continually showing them stories of what if you don't do this? What is the implication? Without scaring them, but really elevating it. And I think that can be the same thing whether you're selling something to do with life consequences, like we are in our case, or you're selling something that's very much a vitamin type product that's going to help you live better in your home or whatever the case is. We have to think about like the stories that people connect with.
I think from a storytelling perspective, it's so critical from a marketing standpoint that you are addressing your consumer or your target audience's pain points and needs first, highlighting that, and then bringing your story in as a positive moment on how you're solving for that specific pain point and how easy it is to solve for that, rather than I see a lot of companies doing just a straight feature benefit type of advertising, and it's not resonating with consumers because they're not seeing themselves in that moment. With Trusty, I think your stories are really resonating because you're connecting to that pain point and you're connecting to that outcome if you address that pain point.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting. I mean, I don't have a ton of consumer marketing experience. So this is, in some ways, this is a lot more fun, right? But at the same time, as Joel called out earlier, we also have to figure this out from the advisor perspective. And I'd say that I don't want to say that's the harder part, but it's definitely more nuanced in terms of trying to figure out, hey, should an advisor prioritize this over, again, many other priorities that they have, many other solutions. We realize as we're selling into the wealth advisor market and also into other professional advisor type of buckets that they're probably getting hit with a demo request every day. They're probably oversubscribed on their budget. They're trying to keep their CAC down, even if they don't use that terminology. And as a result, we have to help them understand where we can fall into the realities of what is on their mind. So they're not necessarily sitting there saying, oh, I got to help my clients with a letter of wishes, right? But and you hit this stat right off the gate, Mandy. I mean, there's $84 trillion set to transfer over the next decade or so in the US alone. And that's a wild number. And if you pair that number with the reality that almost 80% of heirs, when they inherit money, they switch advisors. That is a scary number if you're an advisor. So how do we help an advisor ensure that next generation is going to have a connection to them for this 84 trillion? Otherwise, they're going to be looking to do a whole cycle of customer acquisition to replace everyone that will have moved on and found maybe more modern solutions and whatnot. So what we're trying to do is weave into some of these stories that are in their life, there's trends that are in their life as professionals, to say, how do we fall into that? And it may not be that we solve the entire thing, but how do we help towards a better outcome there?
Yeah, I think you're bang on. How you go about getting to that messaging system is very similar. It's about understanding what the advisor pain point is, understanding what outcome they want, and then creating those stories that really resonate with them to address their pain points and get to the outcome.
Yeah, I think creating a platform that gets the other generations involved in the estate planning purpose or process, gets the other generations connected to the estate planner, whether it's the trust attorney or financial planner, creating a platform that's digital that will engage the younger generations that are more tech savvy. Getting them engaged in the entire process really instills a deeper level of connection with future generations, because if they're part of this process, if they're helping record the stories and document the things for the older generations, maybe it's the 104-year-old grandmother who doesn't have a cell phone, then that younger generation can then walk them through the process. So the more layers of integration you can create with all the different generations within that same family, I think you're going to really show more value than just, I'm going to create a financial plan for you, or I'm going to create some sort of trust document. So I think you're spot on. It's just how you can have this platform as a way to differentiate the service the service you provide as a financial advisor. So yeah, again, there's just all these different things that you want to put in place beyond just the basic services that everyone else is providing in the financial services community. So this is just one little thing I think that helps differentiate you.
Yeah, Joel, to your point, I obviously spending a lot of time at the early stage that our company's at, getting feedback. I kind of view that I'm not on sales calls, I'm on feedback calls, and hopefully they land into a sales process. But one of the questions I lead with all the time is I'll say this $84 trillion wealth transfer number. What keeps you up at night about it? Or what are you doing about it? And just by talking about that, it frames the conversation. It's not about us. It's how's that on their mind? And sometimes it feeds us product ideas or feeds us messaging ideas in terms of how we can get in front of them the next time around. I actually went for a walk with this guy, really bright advisor named Mike. And he was telling me that one of his toughest things is not knowing the names of the kids of his clients, because he has that all written down in his CRM. He's like, but he has nowhere to put the field for their birth date. And then in turn has no idea to know when they turn 18 and are then at 18, without getting into the details, there's certain products from a tax planning perspective that he can actually start to implement for them, which again, back to how do I keep a client in the next generation, make sure the first products they buy are with the advisor that they have this family relationship with. So as he put it, and he wasn't telling me the feature to go build, he just telling me this is my biggest problem. So he actually told me he went and hired a junior person right out of school to basically make a spreadsheet of all the birthdays of all of his kids. Not his kids, sorry. He knows his kids' birthdays, all of his clients' kids. But as you have these conversations, you get ideas. So I think, one of the most important things, just as a takeaway here, I think is don't always pitch your product. Understand what the problem is on your clients' agendas in this moment.
Yeah, I think it's so critical to listen to what consumers are saying and what they want. You've done a really good job with that, Randy. Can you speak a little bit more about your listening strategy?
Sure. I think one of the important things in general also is at any stage is there's not, you can't have an ego going into a sales cycle or a marketing or discovery cycle. And sometimes we may want to speak to the most senior person, but there can be a lot of insights gathered from anyone. So what I usually try and do going into a lot of these calls is I first try and figure out what that individual's role is and what their responsibilities are, so that even if it doesn't align to me, it's, what are your priorities? And then understanding who might deal with the priorities that align to what we're doing. So I think that's the first thing to do is you really need to understand if you're speaking to the right stakeholder. And it doesn't mean that you can't learn from the wrong stakeholder, but you don't want to bring all these ideas back from a group that's not even your buying group. So nailing persona, I think, is really a key element to listening, because we need to be aware of everything that's going on around us, but we really need to zero in to talk to the right people.
Thanks for that. I'm going to shift topics a little bit. Your platform is guided by AI, and you're using AI for your platform. What's your guiding principle for using AI in a space that's so deeply personal, where automation can easily cross the line from helpful to intrusive?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a lot of AI built into this that's doing some amazing things. You've probably seen this term before, but it was early on when we were getting started. We had like an MVP product out there. And at the high level, what it did was as I told you earlier, you took a photo, say, of a nice watch, and it knew that it was a Rolex and Daytona and all these different fields got entered. And we didn't call it AI. We just let it do its thing and we impressed people and they just couldn't believe it. It was this magical moment. And someone posted about it on LinkedIn and they referred to it as quiet AI. Quiet and silent AI were the two words that they used in their post. And that they felt much more comfortable as someone who knows AI, realizing that someone didn't have to yell, "We're using AI." It was just, that was pretty amazing what just happened. And I know that just happened in the following way. I think that that's how we're trying to inject moments of intelligence into the app, is not so much, highlight the AI element, but, weave it into the flow, because the feature that even you, Mandy, said that you love the most has zero AI built into it, right? The fact that you open up the app and you record a video message and someone on the other side is going to get to listen, there's no AI there. Honestly, if we put AI into that experience, we'd probably completely kill it. So we view that as something that's really pure and we don't want to do anything there. Now, there's other moments, though, where we're using some really interesting AI functionality. And I'll give you one of those examples. So I mentioned earlier that we can actually allow you to store all your estate plans, all these wills and power of attorney documents, and you upload those documents. And what we've built in is an AI agentic opportunity to ask questions about that document. So the doc is not just sitting there as a crappy Dropbox-like folder in the top right corner. It's there with a couple of things. One, we generate on ingestion, we generate an AI summary of that document. The average will is, complex will is 20, 30 pages or more. No one has
written in legalese, right?
Yeah, no one understands it. Back to
Yeah.
storytelling, we kept hearing people say, like, when I do find my will, which I can never find, I can't understand it. I can't understand what it's, it says the same thing three different ways in three ways that confuse me. So
Yeah.
we just generate a high level summary in layman terms to explain what that will's intent is. It's not designed to guide an executor per se. It's designed to allow the family to have some clarity. But you can also open up the app, pop into our chat, and you're not chatting with an individual, you're chatting with an AI agent. And in that situation, you could ask a question such as, we're about to go away on vacation. Can you remind me who gets the kids if something happens to us? And that peace of mind of being able to still ask the question in a very human way, but get that answer in the hour before you jump on the airplane, when you can't probably reach your lawyer and you can't, sift through the 30 pages, it just gives you peace of mind. So there's AI that's being used to do that. We, first step was we analyzed the doc, we summarized the most accurate response, we make sure that we provide that to the user, and we prompt them for any next questions they may have on the topic. That's a great example where AI, I think, actually makes it a more natural flow of conversation. And we want to inject more and more of those as we go, that just, reduce the stress of dealing with some of these things.
I love the message that it reduces the stress. I have an education technology company right now, dreamcollege.ai, and what they're doing with AI technology is they're reducing the stress of college applications for students as they go through their college app. Anybody with a kid going to university soon, Dream College is an amazing application to help them reduce that stress, because we know how difficult that process can be and how confusing that process can be in going through that application process. Very similar to estate planning. It is a confusing process. It's filled with documents and applications and all sorts of different things. And Trusty, just as much as Dream College, is helping to alleviate all of that stress with AI to support, using AI as a support tool, not necessarily as the end-all tool to get you to where you want to be.
Absolutely. I think what AI is allowing us to do is I'm going to use fancy words, just dumb things down.
Yes.
And just a couple weeks ago, my wife was having a really hard time sleeping. Couldn't get an appointment with someone who could help. We popped into AI. We explained the situation. We said, give us science-based, suggestions of what we could do. And in no time, like we had improved the situation. And it was done in a way that was very relatable. If you understand the inputs that you want to put in and the output you're looking for, the system in the middle can do a lot of that hard computation. So we come back to what we're trying to do or what you're trying to do. It's, I'm an amazing student. Here's my qualifications. My goal is to get into this school. Help me figure out what I got to do in the middle. That's where the AI can do a really good job. In our situation, I want to go on this vacation. I want to feel better about myself. Here's my concern. We should be able to give you assurance whether you're covered on that front. But then there's going to be, as I said, very pure, holy moments that I don't want to try and stuff AI into, right? I want you to speak from your heart when you talk about why someone is set to inherit something. There's other things that we might be able to do there down the road. And, Joel, you hit on this really early on, which is sometimes we have assets that aren't assigned and could be really important. So we might be able to nudge a user eventually to say, you know what, you've got the following assets in your trustee safe that haven't been assigned to someone yet. We've looked at the division of assets across other members of your family already with the assets. It might make sense to consider the following people. Nudging people on that organization is very different than, okay, now that you've decided that it's going to Ryan, what's the message that you want to send to Ryan?
Mm-hmm. So I think one big thing that everyone's going to have questions about, especially when it comes to trust documents, legal documents, is privacy. So can you talk a little bit how your platform handles that question of privacy? I mean, having all this information out on the digital ether is one thing versus having these private documents just written or typed out, even though nowadays they're created in computers. So there's some sort of digital record of them somewhere. But I'd be curious just kind of if you've ran into any objections from any financial advisors or their clients on the privacy or and then maybe even follow up with some of the legal implications of this. Has anybody challenged if these are legally binding, if this is a legally binding platform? Just kind of curious on both those, the privacy and the legally binding nature.
So let's start with legally binding and then we'll get to privacy, just
Okay.
going backward. First off, the legally binding element of your estate plan is your will, power of attorney documents. A lot of these documents that have to also be signed by hand today.
Trust, those types of things. Yeah.
Exactly. There are some exceptions where I'm going to call it a property memo or letter of wishes, like we're talking about, can be legally enforced. Sometimes the language of those documents shifts a bit. It's the same thing, but it's like I think a tangible personal property memorandum in some cases can be legally binding. But we're getting into nuances here, and I don't want to try and defend the legal standing of this approach. The reality is, if we actually take a step back, in most places, and we didn't really talk about this, there's a reason, as I said out of the gate, that we don't put the ownership of our Rolex watch or our boat or our jewelry into our will. And one of those reasons has to do with avoiding probate fees, which is an option, and that differs again by geographic location. But there's ways to avoid the tax that's associated with death. The other is that in most locations, especially in Canada, upon your death, your will actually becomes a public document when it goes through the probate process. So there's a lot of reasons, and this isn't the privacy element that you're talking about, that we want this in a non-legally binding document that sits outside of the will that doesn't go through the legal process. It can still be brought in as evidence if there is a contentious issue, and then a judge is going to determine, whether it should be upheld or not. But the way I simply explain and manage expectations is the legally binding element is your will. And as a result, if you opted to put that Rolex going to whoever it is into the will, that will trump whatever you put into your letter of wishes, because the will has precedence over anything outside of the will. And it doesn't even matter about the date in most cases. The will serve as the guiding light. But the reality is we just don't put these things in there. And as a result, they're left a complete question at the end of the day, which gets us into this whole cycle that we spoke of. So hopefully that explains that we're dealing with everything that sits outside of your will, which in most cases is going to be the non-legally binding elements. But as we talked about, having clarity is really what families need in this situation.
Well, it's something that the executor can use because they have a lot of leeway in how they execute the will. And so this is just one other tool that they can use if there's any disagreements between the parties of the will or the trust. They can say, here's a tool that the deceased has used to indicate their wishes. And so it becomes more of an argument eliminator. I think this is just another tool in people's tool belt. Yeah.
And to your point on the executor, I mean, a lot of us don't realize when we ask someone to be our executor, it's a high stress role. It is a huge undertaking. And in many cases, they are legally responsible to carry out the wishes per the will in absence of any direction. And if they start to make up their own ideas, they can actually be held liable for something that is against the will. And as a result, the stuff that we're trying to get you to do is the stuff that's missing from the will, the details that are missing, so that there is no ambiguity in how this is, handled. I don't want to skip over your privacy question because it's an important one. So coming back to that one, privacy is core to what we're doing. We look at privacy on a couple of different fronts. So one at the core of what we're doing is a belief that your data is your data, and you decide who you share that with. So on day one, if you set this up and you go through all the steps to assign assets to heirs and put these beautiful videos, and you don't share it with anyone, honestly, there's not much use to it. It's a fun exercise, but there's not much use to it because that you're not going to be able to open up the app. We've got biometric, 2FA, authentication, all locking anyone out from this. So what we really focus on is make sure that you share these wishes with the people that are important. And the different buckets of people that may include is probably your spouse, probably family and friends, and those could include heirs, your executor, and then the last one, which is really important that we've talked about, is these wealth advisors who are part of your estate planning process. And we've made it really easy to put different permissioning levels on that. Now, the last thing, just to give it an extra level of assurance, we made a questionable, I don't think it was questionable, we made a hardline decision, which is our own team can't see your data. So we encrypt all the data at rest, meaning that it's only visible when someone who has had this shared with and you as the user decide. It means that we've got to kind of like operate behind the scenes. And even when it comes to AI, we're not getting as much feedback as we want to improve some of our model work. But we felt, given the category of contents that are in there, that was the right way to do it.
I love that, Randy. And it goes back to how important your listening strategy is at that point, because you're not seeing and you've got that privacy layer in there. Your listening strategy becomes even more important to help you advance your platform to what consumers are actually looking for.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So one last question for you. When you think about what lessons other founders can learn from your approach to your storytelling and brand building, what lessons would you tell them?
I think a couple of lessons are important here. One is, most solutions are going to start with an idea and they're going to evolve. So be open-minded through a lot of those listening skills and storytelling processes that we talked about, and make sure you build your brand accordingly to be flexible to those. An interesting story that we skipped over here is that when I first started working on this as a project, before I was really taking it seriously, to be honest, I let my son name the project, and he had a cute name for it, which I'll share. It was called Loaded, because he's like, Dad, anyone who's going to have all this stuff is going to be loaded. And it was a good placeholder. We had some fun with it. But ultimately, even when we chose a proper name and went on to raise capital, as you shared, around this idea, we had ideas of what we'd become, and we wanted to play with our brand, not just from a name perspective, but a lot of the assets, around this broader theme. But we were still developing features as we went. So we thought about what we really want to solve for. And our simple line to ourselves was to be the trusted way to share your wishes. And that's what's allowing us to guide and really test against that. So I would try and avoid getting too specific about your goal. You've probably all read Simon Sinek's Why, How, What framework. I think it does a good job at frameworks like that. Doesn't have to be his. Making sure that there's some flexibility in what your brand's designed to be, so that as you learn, as we're talking about, that you can make changes without having to completely rename something the way I did after the first few months. But that was more fun once I decided I was taking myself seriously here.
Love that. Any last words that you would like to give our audience?
I feel with the topic of what we do, last words is all we do here, right? But no, I'd love for people to try the app. In the next month or so, the app, as I said, will be completely free to consumers. If you're an advisor and think that this could be interesting to your client base, please come talk to us about how you can help us distribute it and the type of data that trusting clients will give you in return.
Yeah. Well, you've got a good connector here with Joel being in the RIA and in financial advisor space in the States. So he's got good connections for you there.
Oh, yeah. Got about 1,000 people on my list that I'd love to communicate this. Again, they're looking for differentiators, especially in large metro areas. And so if they can just find one thing that differentiates themselves, that they can have a conversation with somebody, some of their feature or benefit to using them versus somebody else. And I know it's going to be available to everybody, but not everyone is leading with this type of conversation or this storytelling. So it's more about the legacy and the stories that you're leaving behind. The money and the cars and the houses, that's almost the easy thing, but it's all the other things in between that really forms that bond with clients and future generations. So I think this is just one other thing that they can put into their arsenal to help differentiate themselves.
Randy, thank you so much for joining us today. Loved our conversation around legacy, estate planning, helping families and people make that emotional connection to what they're leaving behind for their family and friends. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks both of you for having me.
Thanks, Randy. Bye, guys.